This is Monocle on Fashion, a show on Monocle Radio offering exclusive insights and global perspectives on the fashion industry. I'm Natalie Theodosi, Monocle's fashion director and your host. This week, I sit down with Misan Harriman, the celebrated filmmaker, photographer, and social activist. Misan first rose to prominence during the anti-racism protests in the summer of 2020, when his photography, documenting the marches on London's streets, was widely shared. His arresting black and white imagery has a way of capturing the mood and emotion of the time. In September of 2020, he made history again by becoming the first black man to shoot the cover of British Vogue. And then in 2021, he was appointed Chair of Trustees of London's South Bank Centre, a position he continues to hold. It's a remarkable career, given that he only began taking photographs in 2018, just as he turned 40. Misan's talents and values meet the moment. Whether on the street or in a studio, his reportage style reflects the human condition honestly. As he says, between the highlights and the shadows is truth. A fundamental part of his work is his refusal to Photoshop or retouch images. Misan does not play the fashion game, yet his commitment to his principles and his emotional imagery are reaping dividends. The fashion industry comes to him. As you will hear in our conversation, Misan's primary motivation is to use his camera to hold a mirror to our society and drive positive change. In between photographing high-profile actors, models, and royalty, he continues to document activism on the street while using his position at the South Bank Centre to offer a platform to marginalized groups. He is also moving into filmmaking, and in 2024, he received an Academy Award nomination for Best Live Action Short for The After. In a moving conversation, Misan talks to us about the power of taking to the streets with a camera and the ways he uses his various mediums to celebrate beauty in a way that is graceful, honest, and inclusive. Let's hear directly from Misan Harriman.
I always say taking the road less traveled. It's so important when people hear my story to think about the inner child that whispers to them, to tell them who they were always supposed to be. And that's exactly what happened to me. I went to Rajasthan with my wife for my 40th. I'm 47 now. And she had bought me a little Fujifilm camera. And we took a lot of really shitty pictures because I had no idea what I was doing. But 2 years later, we had a baby. A year later, we had a baby. And she was premature. So I started shooting my firstborn, almost to protect myself from being the custodian of something so precious. And that's where my photography started improving. And I think shooting what you love allows you to understand, I have a camera right next to me now, how this small but, seemingly inanimate object can really shape so much of understanding who you are. And in many ways, the camera taught me how to love myself. So during that period, 2020 happened to us all. And COVID and lockdown happened. George Floyd was killed. And I didn't know what to do. As a black man, I have seen many versions of George Floyd, of people that look like me being murdered. And, I had run out of tears. And I looked at my wife and she said, look to your camera. And I took my camera to, I think Hyde Park was the first time I went out. And I didn't know then whether I'd be shooting one person or 5,000. And I started shooting the anti-racist movement. And I had very few followers on Instagram at the time. And about a month in, I opened my phone one day and my Instagram was going nuts. And all my friends were DMing me saying that the son of Martin Luther King had shared my image. And at that time, I didn't know him, and I don't think he knew who I was. I don't think he even knew that the image was not taken in America. And then all the celebutants, everyone you can think of, started sharing this image. And I guess Vogue came across my work. And it's just crazy when I think about it, because my first fully professional gig was shooting, and as you know, in fashion, September for Vogue is not a small deal. And Edward Enningfield and the team took a huge risk by giving a then unknown photographer the cover and the gatefold. You know, I don't know how many. I must have shot 13 people. And that was my first job, the September issue of British Vogue, which is kind of crazy. So
yeah,
there.
so it all happened so quickly.
Very fast, yeah.
But it also kind of shows the power of an image, and that it can still have that even at an age where we're really bombarded with imagery all the time. What is it that makes a powerful image for you? And what do you think that those pictures that you took in Hyde Park, why did they resonate with people so much that Martin Luther King's son reposted it, and then all these celebrities and Edward Enningfield and everyone, I think it was an emotional reaction in many ways,
I think
right?
between the highlights and the shadows is truth. You know, I do the opposite to traditional fashion photography. I don't Photoshop. I don't retouch. It's mainly in black and white, and it's truth. And people saw that, and I guess it reflected the time that we were living through in a way that you cannot help but react to. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Was it quite instinctive that you made this your signature, the black and white photography, no retouching, because things happened so quickly for you, and at first you were just experimenting on your own before you got these big jobs? Or
well, I've grown up obsessing over film and photography, you know, and as Robert Frank said, the eye should learn to listen before it looks. So my eye, even though I didn't have the tool, was always listening. And when I had the tool, it was ready to really be a mirror to the human condition.
Tell me a little bit about, I mean, you were a big cinephile and knew a lot about photography. That was in you, the love of that. What were some of the artists and the creatives that over the years inspired you?
Yeah, I mean, Gordon Parks obviously is a huge, Eve Arnold, Cecil Beaton, and, you know, I think if you look at the 100 most iconic images ever taken, many of them, if not the majority, are in black and white. So I guess that inspired me. And then with fashion, Peter Lindbergh is the beginning of an end, I think, of how you should, you know, his gaze on women particularly was so different. It wasn't the traditional male gaze. And hopefully I'm standing on all of their shoulders, you know?
Yeah. And you really dabble between still and moving image, and you've had an enormous success with your short film as well. Mm-hmm. Is that part of the beauty of your work, that you can work in between the two mediums?
There's a fluidity in my sense of storytelling. I don't see that film and photography are separate. You know, I treat them really the same. You know, I'm looking to harness the emotion of who we are. And let's be honest, we're living through a time when everything feels historic. We're living through a time that I never thought I would live through. You know, there are things that are happening today that are very similar to what I read about in my history classes. So to be able to bear witness to it, and I don't sell my work to newspapers, I'm not commissioned. So it's extra important for me to have this body of work that is a testament, a ledger, if you like, of who we are, for better or worse.
And a big part of it is taking to the streets, like you said, in 2020, before you had that success. And you still do it, even now that you have access to all these rarefied worlds. Tell me about that. Why is it important, and why is it important to keep doing it, and the way that it's been fueling you? I
mean, somebody once described me as the love child of Gordon Parks and Cecil Beaton, because I sit in these two worlds. Listen, photographing iconic faces is amazing, and it gives me visibility. I've photographed many people in the royal household. I photographed so many iconic voices in film and entertainment, music, sports. But the work is the streets. It's the protests. And I call it the basics, so the rights of women, the rights of the queer and trans community, the climate emergency that we're living through, and of course, as a black man, the anti-racist movement, and also recognizing what colonialism, white supremacy, imperialism, and the hyper-capitalist structures we are forced to somehow navigate our lives through. My lens is there to look at that, so people can see the ills of our past, so they can understand the mess of our present, with the hope that we can change and fix so much of what we're living through, so our children, I have 2 little girls, can inherit a world worth living.
And tell me, in the last year, like you said, we're living through times that are incredibly tough, and we never thought it's something that would happen in 2025. What are you seeing on the streets, in people's eyes, when you go out to the protests and capture these movements?
I mean, the last year, I've been for almost exclusively photographing the Palestine protests, mainly because it is the biggest protest movement of my lifetime, at least. I thought the anti-racist movement was big. This is something else, and this has been sustained for 18 months now. And I have photographed the far right. I've photographed the pro-Israel protests as well. But on Saturdays, you go, and it's been, I don't even know what to say. It's bathing in humanity. I work a lot with the Jewish bloc, so I march alongside many of my Jewish brothers and sisters. I have the great honor of documenting Muslim people, Jewish people together, trying to find a future of some kind of shared humanity. And I think that's really important right now, because you don't tend to see my images, strangely, on mainstream media. Just last week, I photographed Stephen Kaposh, who's one of the few living survivors of the Holocaust we have in the UK. And I know him because him and his family, who are all Jewish, are marching to try and say we are better together. We have to recognize the war crime that's been committed to Palestinians as Jewish people. And I think my lens is just to show people that it isn't about sitting on islands of rage. It's so easy to be angry. The algorithms have perfected a way to keep us angry and not see the humanity in each other. And hopefully my images allow us to take stock and realize that when it comes down to it, most of us just want the world to be gentler and kinder.
Why do you think mainstream media isn't as keen to publish this kind of image and highlight this narrative, which is so important?
Let me think. I mean, I once said that I've been celebrated for talking and photographing about women's issues. I'm Global Ambassador for Save the Children, the protection of children, anti-racism, Black Lives Matter, Afghanistan, the Woman Life Freedom Movement. I've been celebrated. But the moment I whisper about Palestine, there's a problem. And that tells me that I have to lean in that direction. Because if everyone is celebrating my voice for Ukraine and everywhere else, why am I told to be quiet about Palestine? And Gaza in particular is a place where half of the population are children. Children. And I don't care what anyone says. I will never whisper about bombs being dropped on children. I will never whisper about 300% in miscarriages for mothers who have held their babies in their stomach for 9 months only to lose them due to the stress that they're in, or the fact that it is the only place on earth where there are more amputated limbs of kids than we've ever seen in recorded history. that's not something I can just look away of and plan my next fabulous shoot in Monaco or Saint-Tropez with celebrities. You know, it's not ever going to be, how will I look at my children and say that I had the platform to do something and I just focused on wealthy, famous people? So that's, I don't know about you. It's crazy to me. The question we should be asking is, why aren't other photographers that have a platform doing it?
Exactly. I was going to say, why do you think you're even asked to whisper, and why isn't it?
Well, you know, I think
one of the
media,
few that's doing it without fearing the consequences in a way.
There is no pillow as soft. I don't know who said this quote, but I love it so much. There's no pillow as soft as a clear conscience. Children need to be protected, even in war. Even in war. Mothers need to be protected, even in war. And I think most people have mortgages to pay and want their livelihood to continue. I'll find it quickly. There's a great quote that I posted when Kurt Volnok was talking to Susan Sontag. Oh, I miss her. And he was asking her about the Holocaust. And she was asked what she had learnt from the Holocaust. And she said 10% of any population is cruel, no matter what. And then there's another 10% that is merciful, no matter what. And the remaining 80% could be moved in either direction. It's just it, right? And if they can be swayed in either direction, then we have to make sure we do the swaying.
Yeah. No, and photography and images like yours can do that, because I find, like you said, there's so much anger being expressed in news anywhere we look.
And Britain's unique because the news system is owned by, I don't know, 5 white cis men, right? You know, if you look at Murdoch or Lord Rothermere, who owns the Daily Mail, I don't know if they wake up every morning thinking, how do we make the world gentler, right? I don't know if they wake up thinking, what can I do with this huge platform of the Daily Mail, right? Or you look at the Sunday Times, which has gone more and more to the right of things. And it's not just about Gaza. I mean, how on earth is a multi-billion-dollar press mechanism focus its hatred towards trans people? Like, I don't know what percentage of the world is trans, but it's tiny. And I will never accept that these souls are the reason why we're in a crisis, right, of disparity of wealth. You know, it is not because of a trans man or woman that business has left your seaside town. And as someone that has many trans friends that I love, you know, I ask people, do you know what it's like to be born into a prison that is your body? Do you understand what that feels like? And then have so many powerful forces and people like J.K. Rowling be so focused on your existence being the threat to most of the Western world as we see it. It's astonishing that group of people are being attacked in this way.
Yeah, and I think by showing their humanity and also the union between different groups of people, your images really can kind of, first of all, for us looking at them, feel a tiny bit of optimism in this day and age, but also hopefully change the narrative. And I love that you, under very different contexts, speak a lot about empathy. And I'm wondering if that's something a lot of more photographers need to consider, like empathy also on the subject that you are working with versus kind of, I think, in the past, especially in the world of fashion, it was there was a lack of empathy and kindness.
Yeah, I think cruelty was almost celebrated in fashion, right? It's, if you look at many iconic photographers that have now been, you know, that were doing everything from sexual assault to, you know, I won't name anyone, but I remember someone telling me that a hero of mine, I'd grown up worshipping him as an image maker in the 80s, a young, let's say you're a 15, 16-year-old model, and you've got a big job, you're a young girl, barely been through puberty, and the first thing this photographer says to you is, look fuckable, love. How do you speak to someone like that way? And it also goes back to the male gaze of it all. You know, I think women haven't had much agency in how they are photographed, because it is mainly men that are the top photographers. And I was in a black cab not long ago, and there was a campaign for a major fashion brand for watches. And they had this guy with his six-pack looking incredible with the watch, you know, the typical watch pose. And the woman, a model, had the watch in her mouth. And I'm like, when did women start eating watches, right? What is going on here? How did the creative director go through all the mood boards and they decided that they're going to have the woman sexualizing a watch, you know? And I refuse to believe that it's women that came up with that shoot. It's definitely the male gaze. So for me, it is my responsibility as an image maker to make sure I protect my subjects and celebrate them for who they are. Which is why when I shoot women, a lot of people have commented that the way I shoot women seems to celebrate them. And I'm like, how weird that that's a rarity?
Yeah.
You know, so that's you know, that's what I'm trying to do.
It's interesting because that's what I've been thinking throughout a lot of this conversation, that a lot of what we're saying should be just
normal,
second nature,
yeah.
very normal, but it is rarities. And I mean, I was going to ask you also about your experience working with fashion magazines. I mean, especially when it comes to Vogue, you were the first black photographer in its 104-year history, I think.
104, yeah. Over a century it took to have... No, I was the first black man.
Yeah.
There was a black woman before me. I was the first black man. And listen, Edward did a great job. I you know, Alexander Shulman, who was there for forever, I don't know her, but it's amazing to me because black men and women have been holding cameras for as long as the cameras existed. James Barnard, who's one of the greatest living photographers of any color, you know, he's in his 90s now, was there, and there are many others, and they were never given the opportunity to shoot a cover for Vogue. Tyler Mitchell was the first for American Vogue, and that was in 2018. And I believe that's because Beyonce insisted. Exactly, I'm not going to give Anna Wintour the thumbs up for that. I'm very sure it was Beyonce's team that it insisted on that. So I think nepotism, you know, it is what it is. If you look at how many covers Son, I don't know, during Schulman's time, it would have been Son like De Machale and Testino. You know, who have, you know, interesting stories to say the least, that got covers and more covers and more covers. And even today, I look at someone like Annie Leibovitz, you know, who is on my Mount Rushmore. You know, I worship this woman, but I don't even know if Annie could remember how many covers she's shot because she shot so many. So I always say, give people a shot. Give them a chance. There are lots of talented, diverse voices that hold the camera. It shouldn't just be me. You know, I shot one cover for Vogue, British Vogue, and I shot a cover for, I shot Lewis Hamilton for GQ Man of the Year, which was great. But, you know, I won't play the game that fashion wants me to. I won't shoot this sort of glossy, whatever they call it. And, you know, my work is, I don't like the idea of Photoshop or retouching at all, which fashion doesn't always like. But what's amazing is that the people respond to my images in a deeply emotive way. So why should I suddenly make my images look like the type of images that if you're looking through a catalogue, you can't even tell the difference? Yeah. You know, so that's probably why I don't describe myself as a fashion photographer. I'm a photographer that shoots people that are in the intersection of culture, which of course includes fashion, but I certainly won't play the fashion game. If fashion industry wants to come to me, they come to me and we make some art, but it's never going to be the other way around.
When you say the fashion game, I mean, part of it is that making everything look really glossy and polished and photoshopped. Is there anything else that you find part of that formula?
I'm not going to be falling out of a nightclub with a creative director of any brand or doing drugs with them or whatever it takes to stay close to them. If they recognize my art and they want to work with me, that's fine. But I'm not going to play that game, which people have to do to get the big campaigns. I won't reduce myself to witness and see things that are against my own moral compass in order to shoot a campaign or a cover. It's as simple as that. And I've been lucky because my stubbornness has allowed me to create my own brand. And what happened is, every time I shot a famous person, they would have a very strong reaction to seeing themselves. And then their publicists or agents will say, my God, Misan, this is really, interesting, which is why a lot of famous folk come to me directly now. For example, when I shot Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, Ryan Coogler and his team, really wanted me to document a really special moment. So I shot the premiere, and then we flew out to Lagos, and I shot the whole cast. I was with the cast preparing for this historic premiere in Africa, in Black Africa for the first time. And it reminds me of the photographers of the 60s, where they were close to the talent in a way that they had unique access. And I've kind of created that market for myself, which means that I don't need... Because a lot of photographers do editorial work. It's not for the money. There's no real money in editorial work in order to have visibility. I have visibility, so I don't need that. So I'd rather shoot the way that I shoot. And one of these sort of really special ones was I got a call from my agent saying, can you be in New York ASAP? And I was like, no, why? And she said, look, the original supermodels would love you to shoot them. They've picked 2 photographers. One was Stephen Meisel and the other one was myself. And I was like, Jesus, this is incredible. And I end up, shortly after that, I was in a warehouse in New York, and in walks, my childhood sort of crush, Christy Turlington, and Cindy Crawford, Naomi Campbell, and Linda Evangelista. And I'm just like, this is just crazy. And upstairs was Stephen Meisel, downstairs was me.
Incredible.
And I'm just like, this is, as far as the fashion world goes, it doesn't get any bigger than that. And I got to, specifically Christy, I got to spend some time with her. And when you meet your idols and they are even nicer than you would expect. And she's the real deal. Very special soul.
How incredible. And also it goes to show that you can be stubborn and you can hold on to your values.
Yes.
But you can still, doors will still open, and the right ones probably.
The right ones will. And I think a lot of photographers need to ask themselves why they hold the camera. If it's for clout, if it's for Instagram followers, then 9 times out of 10, no one's going to care. But if you hold your camera because you want to truly mirror the human condition, and in terms of fashion and brands, if you want to celebrate beauty in a way that is inclusive and graceful, then maybe that matters.
And since we are speaking about fashion media and the industry in general, I think it's also important to kind of ask the question of whether that moment in around 2020, when there was such a big, important reckoning across the whole industry, and more of a focus on giving opportunities to the people that weren't part of that inner circle that has been kind of ruling fashion for so many years. And there's a lot of discussion that we are regressing now, and I'm afraid part of it is true, that it's not as a big priority anymore, and it was kind of a one-off, almost, I hate to use the word, but a trend, and people are now, we're past that. Do you feel that?
Yeah, it was utterly performative.
Yeah.
It was performative allyship. Now, obviously, not by Edward. He's a black man, and he, there's a reason he did what he did. But if you look at fashion from a bird's eye point of view, it has been performative. I don't believe that we have gone forward. It's not just about covers, it's about who's in the room when editorials are being done, who is able to write the sort of articles that really matter. I will say that I've been really impressed by what GQ and Vogue Arabia are doing as well. Really good work, platforming Middle Eastern voices at a time where they really need to be humanized. So I think that's very good. But in general, I think, look at the ownership structure of all the big empires that are really powered by greed. It's about money. Whether it's the ecocide that's going on and what fast fashion is, it's hurting the world in ways that I'm terrified. And yes, when there's a fire in LA, everyone wakes up to it for a moment, but then they go back to greasing their palms and trying to find more ways to make money. And this hyper-consumer world that we live in, it's really, really dangerous. Things like, what's it called? Temu?
Temu and Shein.
Why do we need this?
Yeah.
Why do we need to have clothes that we throw away after we wear twice at the cost of children suffering once again? The fashion world needs to have a reckoning on the price of what profit means to those that have lost the lottery of life, and they pay the highest price for what? For us to buy a jacket for $20.
Yeah. And sadly also, I think even within the luxury industry where standards are higher, even there production is...
Well, China has woke up and China woke up and chose violence with its announcement on where things are made and the OEM producers, and not all of it is necessarily true. I think the algorithm has made things hard to decipher, but we need to ask ourselves, every brand that was named, they need to make real statements on where they're made in Italy, made in France. What does that really mean? And, as a consumer, and this is a thing that's really interesting because I work a lot with one of my companies, Culture 3, on saying, listen, the consumer of tomorrow is going to be very different than the consumer of today. The consumer of tomorrow are going to use their dollar, their pound, to ask you, the brand, what you stand for. And if it's a bit wishy-washy, you won't survive as a brand. So maybe the vanity and greed of these organizations should recognize that the future is not going to be bright for them if the value chain has blood all over its hands.
And a lot of the younger generation of companies do this already, but I think it's a discussion that even the heritage ones, which might be owned by the bigger groups, but still need to address a lot of these political issues. And there's a debate going on whether fashion companies need to be active in politics. And I find it quite hypocritical sometimes that they speak about some topics but choose to stay silent for others. So what's your take on that?
I have to bring up Balenciaga, right? So when I was in a room full of fashion people when I was invited to speak at the Business of Fashion event, and I brought up Balenciaga and I said it's a disgrace that you can have a brand with such an incredible legacy that could do a campaign that, as far as I'm concerned, mistreated children. The idea of a child with empty champagne flutes and all sorts of other hypersexualized things around them, it's not art. There's no gray area there. And as a photographer, I was amazed that went through whatever processes it's supposed to go through, and people still thought that was a campaign that you can do. And what made me sad is that after, I think there was a statement from Kim Kardashian and a statement from Demna, who since left, everything went back on, all the celebrities were there for their next show. And I think it's a shame because that would have been a huge opportunity for Balenciaga to have a reset and say, we made this big mistake, let's look at who is in need to be accountable for this. And I didn't see any accountability. And then it's all vibes again. The influencers, our favorite influencers are there doing videos and selfies at their next show. What about those kids? What about their parents? I'm global ambassador for Save the Children. Whether it's in Gaza or whether it's in a Balenciaga campaign, it's wrong. And we need to be better than this. I don't think that's too much to ask for. Profit over children is something I will never whisper about. Yeah. Don't care how cool people think they are wearing Balenciaga.
Not even that cool. And it's also a missed opportunity that these companies, like you said, incredible heritage, global platforms, that they could be using this idea of fashion soft power in more creative, more effective ways. But perhaps it is going to come from this new generation of companies that are being formed.
What's Jacquemus? Am I saying it right?
Yeah.
some cool campaigns I'm seeing there.
Yeah.
You know, platforming interesting voices, interesting photographers. Also, look, some of the coolest artists in the world are coming, actually Palestinian heritage. You know, you've got Saint Laurent, who's making incredible stuff, right? And the fashion world, trust me, will come calling. And these artists are going to demand that their culture and heritage is respected in the campaigns that are made. And I think that's what's going to happen. If you look at what's been going on in Coachella, look how many big bands are having political voices. You can't not be political when the whole world's on fire. You know, my idol Nina Simone said, you know, to be an artist is to reflect the times that we live in. And I think fashion has always reflected the times that we live in. So fashion needs to decide whether it will be the Hunger Games, right? Mm-hmm. And be a vacuous observation of hyper-consumerism, or it can be more. And it can be part of what weapon we have, the tools that we have. You know, my tools, my camera, it's my sword and shield. Fashion has way more cultural capital than I do individually. It could do more and still make money.
Well, let's hope. Let's see what happens. I'd love to also talk a little bit about your work at the South Bank Center, because again, it is bringing all these different types of creatives together and making sure it stays as relevant cultural institution. Tell me a little bit about that and how you're getting people through the door.
Yeah, so I'm chairman of the South Bank Center. I laugh because it's just like my life is crazy. You know, I'm overseeing 11 acres of London with the amazing team, the CEO Elaine Bedell and the creative team. And it is the great village hall of Europe, South Bank. It is a place where all are included. You know, we have a festival called Meltdown. A few years ago, we had Chris and the Queens, and that was massive for me, for the trans community as well, you know, because they had a convening space to celebrate them for who and what they are. And I was like, this is South Bank at its best. Then we had Grace Jones, Auntie Grace, you know, in her heels, in her, I will not confirm her age, but in her wonderful vintage. And we've just announced Lil Sims for this year's Meltdown. But we also have amazing classical music and making that accessible for the next generation. We have our skate park, so we're having street and skate culture literally live within our 11 acres. We host the BAFTAs, which is obviously, you know, the home of film. We have the London Film Festival. And I'm just deeply proud of everything South Bank represents. You know, I do wish we had more support from the government because American cultural institutions have, you know, billion-dollar endowments. We don't have that. So we have to always figure out how to keep the lights on whilst being this inclusive convening space for all. And yeah, it's one of the proudest things that I do.
Beautiful. And it captures in a way the way you describe it, the spirit of London that, given everything and Brexit and all the changes happening, we were scared that we might lose it.
We've retrenched as, you know, we've become this small island that, you know, that somehow is still drinking the Kool-Aid of empire. Whereas actually the things that we do best are culture. And it's our greatest export. And South Bank represents that in a really unique way. We have our 75th anniversary next year. Monocle have to get involved. You must come and we know we should figure out what we can do. That's going to be very, very big. We have our new royal patron, the Duke of Edinburgh. It's a uniquely British space that has a global voice for all.
Incredible and so important. And maybe just to wrap, you're speaking about all these incredible cultural moments happening and your own experience with photography. If someone is kind of looking for creative inspiration or curious, feeling that inkling to maybe pick up a camera and try that out, what would be your advice?
Put the camera down. Put the camera down.
Okay.
And ask yourself why you want to hold it. Watch as many, there are loads of free documentaries and all the great, I call them poets of light that came before us. All the men and women that held the camera, that observed film, fashion, protests in ways that really, really mattered. You know, learn from those that came before us. Watch the Merchant Ivory films, right? You know, watch a Room with a View, look at the beauty captured in that. Watch Sam Mendes' Road to Perdition. understand sound design, scripts. All of it leads back to then why you pick up the camera. You know, it can't be just vibes. Look at the work that the great artists have made. Do not steal or borrow from them, but understand why they made the art. And they were not thinking of algorithms. They were not thinking of what's going to get them attention. They were thinking about truth, grace, beauty in the human condition. And that can maybe lead you to your journey on why you should hold the camera.
That was Misan Harriman, photographer and social activist. And that's all for today's show. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned. We have more big interviews coming next week. Today's episode was produced and edited by Lily Austin. I'm Natalie Theodosi. Thank you so much for listening.